Joining me now is Steven Ehrlich, the Director of Research for Digital Assets here at Forbes. Steven, I'm really excited to talk to you today. As you know, you were the last on-the-record interview with Sam Bankman-Fried back in December, right before his arrest in the Bahamas. You also just recently talked to him while he's on house arrest. But I do want to take it back to that day, December 12th, when you were talking with him. Did he have any sense that he was facing any imminent legal trouble?
Yeah, thanks, Brittany, and thanks for having me. As far as I can tell, no. I mean, questions were swirling around him as to whether or not he was eventually going to be arrested. He was being asked all the time if he was scheduled to speak in front of the House Financial Services Committee the very next day, December 13th. There were questions leading up to it whether he might come to the United States to testify in person, and he always said that he saw no reason why he couldn't. That said, he had no intention. That said, he had no intention of going to the U.S. and he was going to testify via Zoom or some sort of video link. But I conducted that interview with him in the morning of December 12th. He was continuing to revise his testimony, which we published later that evening after he was arrested, which was about 17 or 18 pages long. So it's clear that he was working very hard on it. And if he was going to be arrested when we spoke that morning, I got no indication of it. My sense is that this was a surprise to him.
And you just reported on a pretty important phone call he received just a few hours after you talked to him from his lawyer. What can you tell us about that?
Right. So some of the sources that I spoke with that are familiar with the events of that day suggest that he got a phone call from his New York-based lawyers early that evening from the FBI. And he was told that the Bahamian police were on their way to arrest him. They were going to arrest him in 40 minutes. However, if he wanted to, he could agree to extradition, return to the United States, and the FBI would come and get him on a private plane out that night before the Bahamian police would be able to reach him. Obviously, when that happened, it startled him, his parents, who were staying with him in the Bahamas during that time and were in the room with him when he got that phone call. And they frantically tried to call anybody that they could. They reached out to the national security director. They reached out to the second in command or second in power at the attorney general's office, as well as the head of the Bahamian Securities Commission. And they all claim to have not heard a thing. I actually heard back from the Bahamian National Security Director, and he denied ever receiving any phone calls from those people. But regardless, what happened about 40 minutes later, or 30 minutes at this point, as if on cue, the Bahamian police came in. They arrested Sam. They gave him about 5 minutes to take some medicine, collect a few belongings. Got asked all the time, like, what happened to all his T-shirts, FTX T-shirts and sweatshirts that he wore at media appearances, and basically that was his uniform for every day of his life. He said he left all those in boxes back in the Bahamas because he left with basically just a backpack, and he was on his way to basically a drunk tank type holding cell in the Bahamas, where he was going to then get a bail hearing the next day.
I'm excited to hear about his time in that prison, but before we get there, why was there so little known about his arrest? Why was everyone so tight-lipped? Was the DOJ afraid he was going to flee the Bahamas or something else?
So it's difficult to tell exactly why there was so much secrecy about this, especially because it appears that the U.S. formally requested extradition through official channels on December 10th. That said, a number of people, including Warren Davidson, who sits on the House Financial Services Committee and is a Republican congressman from Ohio, suggested that perhaps the timing was not coincidental and that certain people in the government may not have wanted Sam Bankman-Fried to testify the following day in Congress under oath, because that would have that may have led to, in their opinion, some uncomfortable questions about his close ties with members of Congress. He had regularly met with SEC Chairman Gary Gensler and other key officials at the SEC, and there were questions about whether or not that close relationship engendered between him, FTX, and elements of the federal government may have caused them to keep their eye off of the ball, so to speak.
Stephen,
None of that has been confirmed, though.
Got it. And Stephen, it's really interesting that you talked to him just a few hours before all this went down. I mean, you really had a finger on the pulse there. You talked to him for almost an hour and didn't get the sense that he thought any of this was coming down the pipe so soon. So what was his response to the arrest?
I really think the response to the arrest, it's almost like you get a shock to the system. I mean, I think he was really just trying to get a handle of what was going on. Up until then, he was living in essentially a gilded palace atop one of the premier residences in the Bahamas, in a secluded private neighborhood, and all of a sudden he's getting thrown into a drunk tank, and he's now talking to security guards. He's trying to figure out exactly what's going on, trying to meet with his lawyers, trying to meet with his parents. The next day, he had a bail hearing where he was denied bail rather quickly, which meant that he was going to have to be sent to the infamous Fox Hill prison, which, according to the U.S. State Department, is bereft with all kinds of poor conditions, like maggots and poor sanitation, so on and so forth. And I think he was really just trying to figure out the next steps, understand exactly what type of legal jeopardy he was in. He had trouble even just finding the indictments against him, and I think just really trying to get his bearings. I mean, he really was thrown into a world that he did not know anything about. When we were speaking, he told me that he thought prison was going to be kind of like the Shawshank Redemption, obviously one of the most famous movies of all time. And one element of that he was really speaking to was the belief that, for instance, a lot of the prisoners in the movie claimed to be innocent, and that they were in there for various reasons. And I mean, Sam basically told me that once he got there, he realized that he was the only person who, he says he was innocent. Obviously, he's professing innocence, and that's something that will ultimately need to be decided in a court of law. But most of his prisoners there, most of his fellow prisoners, all just matter of factly said, yeah, we're guilty. We were involved in drug running or arms dealing. And the justification for that is, well, we can make 3 times as much doing this as we could in working at McDonald's. We didn't necessarily choose this life, and we'd be happier to have more normal jobs, but we do what we need to do to take care of our family. And if that means that we need to spend up to a third of our life in prison, so be it. That's the price that we need to take.